As the celebration dwindled, a large body slipped quietly out of the Stone Hill Inn. The figure moved toward a grave, the grave belonging to a goblin named Droop. The figure, that of a still grieving barbarian. Cursing the gods for Droop's death, Dwayne frantically buried Orc Captain Brugar Axebiter's great axe behind Droop's tombstone. The urchin warrior staggered down an empty street, mindlessly drunk. He stumbled, fell face first into the dirt road, and passed out. A dark figure picked up Dwayne and dragged him inside. The next morning, Dwayne woke with a throbbing headache and a squirrel sitting square in the middle of his chest. The squirrel quickly jumped off and ran to a man's shoulders. The man was expertly slamming down a large hammer on a bar of glowing hot metal. "Where the fuck am I?" asked the hungover giant. The old man looked over his shoulder and grunted. "His Majesty awakens." As the old man spoke, the squirrel on his shoulder chattered loudly in agreement. "My son is away apprenticing in Neverwinter, so if you have nothing better to do, help me deliver these tools to Kayleen," said the old blacksmith gruffly. "She'll need them for the harvest." Dwayne picked up the tools and walked out. The squirrel hopped across the forge to the door and scolded the barbarian as he walked away. As if asking the air itself, Volkir Dresdeath looked up. "Maximus, if this boy is yours, I suppose you would have me watch over this savage?" After returning from dropping off the tools to Kayleen's hired helpers, Dwayne repaid the blacksmith for his drunken night in the shop by staying and helping Volkir with all types of jobs in the shop throughout the day. As the day came to an end, "I'm sorry," said Dwayne. "Sorry?" asked the blacksmith, his voice sounding as if it originated deep inside his barrel chest. The squirrel even seemed to stop scowling at him for a moment. "Every interaction you've had with me has been the result of my drunkenness. I'm sorry. I wanted to formally introduce myself." Arms crossed, the blacksmith chuckled. "Do you still want me to brand you?" With a confused face, Dwayne appeared not to remember what the blacksmith was talking about. "I'm Dwayne Johnson, son of Maximus Johnson, blacksmith of Thunder Tree." Dwayne opened his pack and removed his impressive hammer. The squirrel scampered across the room, frightened to a higher perch. "Unfortunately, this tool belongs to a man that I never got a chance to meet. I keep it because it reminds me of a time that I wish to understand," continued the warrior sullenly. Dwayne learned that the blacksmith of Phandalin, Volkir Dresdeath, was his father's apprentice. Maximus was killed by the eruption of Mount Highsun before Volkir could finish his training. After Maximus's death, Volkir decided on a quiet family life in the frontier town of Phandalin, where the only use for a blacksmith was horseshoes, farm tools, and plow parts. Holding his father's hammer, Dwayne bowed before Volkir and humbly requested to be apprenticed. In a 10-day time, Dwayne had learned what should have taken months. Within 2 10-days, Dwayne was making simple tools. By the third, he was competing with Volkir, the hard-hearted old blacksmith, stunned by and yet proud of his progress. Volkir began to think of Dwayne as a long-lost son. The squirrel even seemed to be tolerating him enough. One day, blackened and sweaty, Dwayne looked up from the forge to see a familiar silhouette in the doorway. "Sildar," the newly minted smith called to his friend. "It is time," said the old fighter. Dwayne put down his father's hammer, pet his squirrel friend, and it wasn't long before the 2 brothers of the Lord's Alliance were off to Neverwinter alongside Aldrich, the ranger of Mithril Hall. After 2 days in an ox cart, the spires of Neverwinter rose like some northern sun, gloriously shining against the sea of swords. The sprawling metropolis was still endlessly abuzz with commerce and construction. Rumors swirled, tales were told, rats scurried, barkeeps listened. And Daggold Neverember, Lord Protector of Neverwinter, did whatever the fuck he wanted. Almost never nervous, Dwayne actually felt butterflies in his stomach as he prepared to meet Lord Neverember. Arriving at the Hall of Justice, temple to the patron god Tyr, the barbarian looked hardly barbaric, wearing gleaming green dragon scale armor, helmet glinting vermilion in the morning light. The vicious axe slung across the barbarian's back assured that no layperson would challenge the big man. The high walls and imposing stonework of Tyr's mighty temple marked it as a timeless bastion of duty and honor. The great temple stood atop a seaside bluff, challenging all threats from the Sea of Swords or inland Faerun. The city had long served Tyr, the god of justice, and even after the deity fell nearly 100 years ago, the residents refused to convert the temple to worship another god. And now that Tyr had returned, the Hall of Justice continued stoically as a place of worship and power. The temple is a radiant and beautiful structure, big enough inside for giants to walk comfortably or for dragons to rest in the great hall beneath the high domed ceiling. The trappings of the building reflect an age dedicated to justice and temperance in all things. Lord Sildar Hallwinter introduced Dwayne to Lord Neverember in private chambers inside the labyrinthine passageways of the Hall of Justice. It took mental focus for Dwayne to not stand with his mouth agape at the immensity of the building. Having grown up on the streets of Neverwinter, it wasn't uncommon for Dwayne and his fellow urchin friends to beg from the nobility, often to scorn and disgust, within the shadow of this very hall. Now, he walked into its doors a hero. They would beg favors of him. Lord Neverember greeted Dwayne in the traditional Lord's Alliance way, forearms grasped tight, eyes locked in a show of respect. The Lord Protector of Neverwinter and member of the Council of Lords then embraced young Dwayne and slapped him on the back. "Welcome to Neverwinter, son." Dwayne decided not to mention his childhood begging on the streets. Lord Neverember had promised to bring order to the chaotic city, and Dwayne personally witnessed this progress. Lord Neverember was a man of his word, and Dwayne respected him immensely. After this private meeting, a ceremony was commenced within the great hall, where Dwayne, alongside Dwarven Lord Aldrich Valerian of Mithril Hall and Kaidos Minitrian, tiefling sorcerer, were honored for their heroism in saving the city of Phandalin from the evil intentions of the Black Spider. He was given a cloak emblazoned with the crown of the Lord's Alliance. It was a far cry from his goblinoid wolf pelt. Soon the barbarian and the newly minted official within the Lord's Alliance visited his old part of the city. It tore at Dwayne's heart to see the orphans still begging, running wretches in the filthy streets. He ducked as he stepped through the diminutive dark doorway of his old dwelling. He was greeted with fear, but once he removed his helmet, the fear turned to joy as the inhabitants of his old squat house rushed to lavish him with adoration. The joy turned to astonishment as Dwayne opened his sack and dumped more gold onto the table than any of the innocent urchins believed existed all at once. The matronly Zasha Eaglesnout leapt out of her chair faster than anyone can remember her moving. They expected her to run to the money. Instead, she dashed past the table and into Dwayne's arms. "I trust you'll know what to do with this, Auntie," Dwayne said. The smallest of the orphans, Jib Roney, tugged at Dwayne's leg, and Dwayne spent the next few minutes toddling around the orphanage with the boy grasping his massive leg and laughing like he had never before. Dwayne would leave Neverwinter the following morn. It seemed foggier than usual. The tiefling sorcerer Kaidos joined Sildar and Dwayne, excitedly telling Dwayne about his new books. Dwayne smiled, though eventually his attention wandered. Kaidos hardly noticed, so excited by his findings. The three uneventfully made their way back to Phandalin, where one angry squirrel demanded to know where the barbarian had run off to.